Donald Trump claiming over and over again that the election is rigged. It's not the first time a presidential candidate has made accusations of voter fraud. We mentioned some of the examples at the top of this newscast. Here are a couple more. 96, Bob Dole accused President Bill Clinton of trying to give citizenship to illegal immigrants so that they could vote for him. This time around, Bernie Sanders supporters claimed fraud during the primaries when 125,000 people disappeared, apparently, from voter registration database in New York. Julie Pace is with us now. She's a White House correspondent for the Associated Press. Julie, Carl mentioned that the last month these sorts of things come up. But is this new in its scope, or is this same old thing we just forgot about it?
It's new in its scope in this sense. You have this coming from the nominee himself, and it's coming repeatedly. It started in August, and we've heard Trump say over and over and over again that there is fraud, and that it's actually going to be at polling places. You've seen his advisors try to say, no, he's just talking about the media and how the general political system is rigged against him. But every time Trump himself comes back and says, no, I'm actually talking about what's happening at the polling places.
I mentioned a stat from earlier that the chances are like getting hit by lightning. And further, every one of these swing states has its own presidential election. We don't have one. We have 51. And the head of each election is the governor. And in those states, those governors are Republicans.
Exactly. I mean, I think it's important that people really have a good understanding of how our elections occur. And they're run by the states. These are individual statewide elections, essentially. A lot of these states, as you mentioned, have Republicans who are governors, which means that the Secretary of State in those locations are also generally Republicans. And if you voted in an election in America, you know that these are generally elections that happen in public places. Yes, there's absentee ballots, there's early voting, some vote by mail, but generally you walk into elementary school gymnasium or a church hall and you cast your ballot in a public place. And so as Carl was mentioning earlier, there's always talk about voter registration fraud, but there are very few examples of actual fraud that happens on election day. And even when in those instances when it happens, it's in such small numbers that it doesn't sway the actual outcome of an election.
Possibly because if you do it, you're going to prison if you get caught. It's a very serious felony in most places. And Julie, so many of us have wondered, amongst ourselves, reporters and others, what we thought would happen if at some point this guy who bases everything on winning realized at some point he's not going to win. Is that what we're learning now, the last-minute strategy that I didn't lose, it was rigged? Is that what this is, or what?
I think there are two things happening here. I think on the one hand, you have Trump looking at what is an incredibly tough battleground landscape for himself, and the way that he can win now is if he drives down turnout. Right. If he has young people and minorities who just are so disgusted with this or think that the election is going to be rigged that they just don't even show up. That could benefit him. And then the second thing is, to your point, Donald Trump has built his brand on the idea that he's a winner. If he loses this election, he will be losing on the biggest stage, essentially, in the world. And how does he message around that? He has not proven to be someone who is very self-reflective, who would be critical of things that he's done in this campaign. He's going to look elsewhere, and this seems to be where he's signaling he will point the finger if he does in fact lose.
At least for this Twitter moment. We shall see what the hours ahead bring. Always great to see you, Julie. Thank you.